currently a consultant at Paramita and Neo BBC, and he's going to speak on supportive care of a baby on the ventilator. Over to you, Sriram.
Hello.
We can hear you. We can hear you. We can see you. Please start.
Yes, sir. So after such a nice and lucid lectures by the Dr. Srinivas sir and Dr. Tejo, so they have, they have thought about the mode of ventilation and how do you respond when there is sudden deterioration on the ventilator. But for any baby who is on ventilation, ventilation alone is not going to help you in getting the baby out of ventilator successfully and then discharging. So you need a whole lot of care, which is as important as ventilation, which is nothing but the supportive care. So this supportive care has almost all the aspects of neonatology. So it encompasses the whole support of the entire other organ systems, not only the respiratory system. So let us move on to this. So as I said, this encompasses the whole baby care. So you have to take care of the baby as a whole, not only the respiratory system. But if I start telling this, it becomes entire neonatology, which anyway we cannot complete in the time limit. So I will be concentrating or restricting myself to certain aspects. These are nothing but a meticulous monitoring is very, very essential, because when you are ventilating, monitoring becomes very, very important, and which entails several levels of monitoring. So I'll talk about clinical monitoring and radiological monitoring. Then skin care, because we know that babies, we fix a lot of probes for a baby on ventilation, lot of probes, lines, tubes, everything is there on the baby. So how do we take care when, so everything has to be stuck on the skin. So the skin has to be taken care properly, and how do we ensure that they are put in very safely. And another important thing is, we all know that these small babies are at risk of infection, and ventilation adds to that risk. So we don't want to give one more infection to the baby. So that is why how to prevent from these iatrogenic things happening to the baby, that is the prevention of ventilator associated pneumonia. We have a bundle approach for that. And prevention of central lines. Usually for a babies on ventilation, central lines are usually an associated feature, because most of the babies do have the need for central lines, either because of the need for TPN or for inotropes. So we'll also look into that, how do you prevent the infection associated with central lines, and something about neurodevelopmental supportive care, and a little bit on nutrition. So in the given time, I'll try to complete all these things. So let us see, the first thing, the respiratory status for a baby, because we know that we have ventilated the baby for respiratory distress, isn't it? So when you have ventilated for the baby for distress, so you have to monitor the respiratory status, whether the baby is improving or deteriorating. So how do we know that? So we have seen from Dr. Srinivas's lecture that how do you titrate your settings depending upon the baby's response to the ventilator. So I will not go into that detail. So now let us see, the first thing for the respiratory system is endotracheal tube. Without endotracheal tube, you cannot do an invasive ventilation. Now we will discuss something about the endotracheal tube. So this is a well-known thing from the NRP guidelines. So which size ET with which the baby has to be intubated. So this is, we have two nomograms for that. One is based on gestational age and one is based on the weight. So this is a standard international nomogram, which almost, I think most of us follow this. But one caveat is that our babies may not be exactly have the same tracheal dimensions as that of Western standards. So if we intubate a smaller baby, so for example, a 2.2 kilogram baby with a 3.5 ET tube, we usually end up having a strider once we extubate the baby, because it becomes tighter. So always, it's always a good idea. You can go a 0.5 mm smaller in babies who are around 2 kilograms of age. So you may not strictly follow this, but this is just a guideline. You can use this guideline. Doesn't mean that you have to exactly use the same numbers. So because these numbers do change, especially from the babies who are around 2 kgs, the babies, you may use a smaller size ET tube to prevent this from happening, the strider from happening once post extubation. The other thing is how depth. So once you have selected the tube, how much you have to insert. So that is based on the nasotragus length. So we know that from the nasal tip to the tragus. So you can measure that, and that could be your number for the depth of insertion. So previously, this is now considered a better indicator than your 6+1 criteria, because 6+1 criteria, this is 6+ weight criteria. 6 centimeters plus weight. For example, is very valid for a bigger babies. For example, baby's weight is 2.5, then it becomes 8.5, 6 plus 2.5, 8.5, similarly 8. But nowadays, as we move on to a smaller gestational group, what happens is that number may not be valid. So babies who are ELBW babies, for babies who are less than 29 weeks of gestation, then the 6 plus weight criteria may not be good. And so this is a reference standard. So this also you can shoot, but what these numbers are just a guideline. So once you can, for the initiation, you can do this, but you have to check whether that number really suits that baby or not. So you have to confirm the depth of insertion. So how do we confirm that? So I'll come to that confirmation just a bit. And one more thing, once you have intubated with the right size, always check for ET leak. So how will you ensure an ET leak is happening or not? Because whatever gas you are pumping from the ventilator into the baby's lungs, whether there is a significant endotracheal leak is happening or not, that also is very important. So one clinical clue is to auscultate over the larynx. So you will find a hissing sound which is coming. Sometimes it is so audible even without a stethoscope also. You can hear from the larynx whether there is significant endotracheal leak is there or not. Or the other, if the leak is minimal, you may not clinically pick it up, but pulmonary graphics, as Dr. Tejo has put it out, that also will help you in picking up whether there is a significant endotracheal leak is not. If there is a very slight leak, for example, 10% or 15%, it doesn't matter, because most of the new generation ventilators, they compensate for a certain amount of leak. But if a significant leak is there, then whatever pressure you have set, that may not get delivered to the baby. Whatever volume you have set, whatever flows you have set, that may not be entering the lungs actually. So that is why you should be careful with those kind of, with there is significant leak. Now, how do we fix the endotracheal tube? So there are several ways of fixing the endotracheal tube. So, but the most important thing is you should use very less amount of plaster, as much less amount of plaster as possible. So these are the E technique was used. This is another technique which is commonly used, where you paste a Dynaplast a strip over on the this columnar area, and then the other limb is used to tie around the this one. So when you are using this kind of a Dynaplast, which is shown here, always have, and one more below this Dynaplast, always use a skin friendly adhesive like a Tegaderm or any other skin friendly adhesive onto which you can paste this Dynaplast, because when you are peeling it off, the skin doesn't come off, because if you paste these things directly onto the skin, there is every possibility that the skin will peel off when you are trying to remove this plaster. And if you use this E technique, some of the older people previously used to these things, but this is not necessary, because it entails use of a large amount of adhesive, and when you use large amount of adhesive, naturally a lot of area of skin is exposed to adhesive, and that can lead to damage to the skin, which is not required. So try to use as minimal adhesive as possible. Now, once you have fixed the ET tube, now how do you confirm whether it is in correct position or not? So there are three ways of doing it: clinical, then radiological, and even ultrasound also can be used. Clinically, you can look at the air entry, whether it is clearly equal or not, but it can miss it, especially in ELBW babies. You may not be able to exactly hear, but it is very important that you do auscultate in the axilla and look for equal breath sounds which are heard or not. If you are in doubt, then you can get an X-ray done. X-ray, it is the commonest thing which we all do, but doing multiple X-rays is again entails a risk to the baby, because you're exposing the baby for radiation. So nowadays we have this ultrasound which is there in almost all the NICUs, and it can happen at bedside. It is very instant, dynamic. You can check the endotracheal position. So how do we check it? So on the ultrasound, this is very visible if you do it in the suprasternal notch. So you have to put the probe in the suprasternal notch, a high frequency probe, and then in the sagittal plane, you can look at the arch of aorta. This is the arch of aorta which you are seeing. So from the surface, from the superior surface of the arch of aorta, the distance between the tip of the endotracheal tube and the arch of aorta has to be at least 1 centimeter distance should be there. So if this is there, that means then the endotracheal tube is accurately positioned and it is not going to hit the carina. So this much you can do. So this is now picking up. There are several studies and meta-analysis also is there in infants and newborn, where they have shown that this is quite deep. In comparison with X-rays, it fares very well, and hence if it is available, you can use it. Definitely go ahead and use the ultrasound, but needs a little bit of expertise in the beginning. Now, once you are done with all this, once you have done so meticulously the intubation, the fixation, everything, so you can have something called as an ET card. So you can write all these things on a ET card and then stick it up in the on the what do you call on the beside the bedside of the baby, so that when there is a need for reintubation and someone else is doing that, he knows pretty well that these numbers do suit the baby. So he need not do it all the things, all the steps again. So he knows how much ET size has to be used in this baby, what is the depth of insertion, how much it has been cut, and what is suction catheter size that has to be used, and what depth of suction catheter that has to be inserted. So all these things will be quite evident for a second person who is again re-intubating a baby, if at all the need arises. So you can have this kind of a small card stuck onto the baby's bed or the incubator, so that you need not repeat all the steps again and again. Now, once you're done with the upper airway, it's now fixed. The airway is very well fixed. It's perfect now. Now, how do you monitor? And the baby has been on the ventilator. Now, how do you monitor the respiratory status? I'm not going to the ventilator settings and the respiratory condition. I'm just going to whether the overall the baby is improving or not. So how do you do that? Most of the situations why we have intubated them is for respiratory distress, isn't it? So how is the respiratory rate, whether it is improving or not? So you can, but always try to count it. Don't be in a hurry. Count the respiratory rate for full 1 minute and then look at the baby. If over a period of time, keep on counting the respiratory rate so that you will know the baby is improving or deteriorating. The second parameter is the most commonly used scoring system, that is Silverman-Anderson score system, which is used to what you call the quantify or objectively note the severity of respiratory distress. I think most of you know about this. I'll just refresh you. So there are 5 parameters in the Silverman-Anderson score system. This will tell you about the respiratory distress part, that is how much retractions are happening or how hard the baby is working to ensure that he is able to oxygenate himself well. So the upper chest, it is again graded into 3. All the 5 parameters are given 3 scores, 0, 1 and 2. 0 means everything is fine. 2 means everything is significantly working very hard. That means baby's significant trouble is there. For the upper chest, this is slightly different. It is quite objective here. So if everything is normal means, what do you mean by normal? When abdomen and chest are moving simultaneously together, that there is no difference and both are moving up together and moving down together. Grade 1 distress means there is some lag now. That means when abdomen is moving, chest is not keeping its pace with abdomen. There is a lag, abdomen is moving and chest moves slightly later than abdomen. And grade 2 means there is a inverse pattern, that is the chest, when abdomen is moving out, the chest is caving inside. So it is a seesaw kind of respiration which is happening here. So this is the upper chest. In the lower chest, so for the upper chest for a newborn baby means you have to draw an imaginary line along the mid axilla. Anything above it is upper chest, anything below is lower chest. So for these lower chest retraction, you look at the intercostal spaces here and whether they are slightly visible, grade 1. If it is severe, then it is grade 2. Then xiphoid retractions, look at the xiphoid process, where if it is slightly visible, 1, and similarly significant retractions are there, then it is sternal indrawing is in 2. Similarly, flare, no flare, mild flare, severe nasal flaring is there or not. Then grunt. If it is no grunt is 0. If there is audible grunt only with stethoscope, it is 1. If it is audibly heard without any aid, then it becomes 2. So now you know the scoring system. So objectively score every 2 hours, put the score on your monitoring sheet so that you know whether the baby is improving or deteriorating. So it's always a good idea to have an objective assessment here. The third way where we can monitor is by using the pulse oximetry. I think we all know it. We all routinely use it. And without this device, there is no intensive care at all, isn't it? So certain things are very important when you rely so much on pulse oximetry for oxygenation. So the numbers displayed on the pulse oximetry are reliable only if the waveform is clear, because this works on the principle of Beer-Lambert law with pulsatility. Without pulsatility, the instrument does not give a reliable results. So that is why there should be a pulsatile tracing. That means pulsatile waveforms are mandatory. If it is visible, then only you can rely on whatever the number that is displayed on the instrument. Otherwise, don't rely on those numbers. The another important thing is phototherapy. We all use it many a times in sick babies and any other baby with jaundice. So this high intensity phototherapy light can interfere with the readings on the pulse oximeter, because this is also light and this also works on the principle of light. So that is why if the light impinges on the probe, then that will give you erratic signals. So you have to shield the pulse oximeter, the pulse ox probe with some other light, so that it will not affect the baby. It will not affect the readings. Then again, you should ensure that whatever device you are attaching to the baby, it has to be skin friendly. So always rotate the pulse oximeter probe side, so that prolonged attachment to one particular side can induce burns, because the pulse oximeter emits infrared lights also, and infrared, you know that it is hot. So prolonged attachment to a single side can lead to burns. So that is why this is very important that this has to be taken care. And we all very familiar with the movement artifacts. When you're attaching a baby to pulse ox, there is significant movement artifacts. Babies keep moving, so there is an artifact. So to avoid or lessen the impact of those artifacts and to pick up a good waveform even during a low perfusion, that is even in shock states, there are technologies which pulse oximeters which have this kind of a technology, that is SCT. One of the classical and the foremost principles which has been used, this technology is Masimo. That is why Masimo technology is indicated in babies who are in shock, or to avoid even the movement artifact. So if you take care of all these things, then pulse ox is the best instrument to rely on oxygenation. You need not give repeated blood gas to look at the PO2 levels. So once you rely on the instrument, now what targets you want? For any baby who is on a ventilator or any kind of a respiratory support which entails use of oxygen, you should ensure that his saturation lies between only these two numbers, that is 90 and 94. We don't want anything more than 94% or anything less than 90%. So to ensure that these things are happening in a busy NICU, we need to have alarm limits, and these alarm limits have to be set. So please set the low limit at 89 and a high limit at 95. So we don't want anything. Why we want such a very strict targets? This is very important, because we want to avoid all this diseases which are not manifest immediately. As you can see, bronchopulmonary dysplasia, necrotizing enterocolitis, or retinopathy of prematurity, or the brain problem, that is periventral leukomalacia. These things are not evident immediately. So whatever thing we have done now will manifest later, isn't it? So it is like our karma. The results are not immediately visible. They are visible only, they are manifest only later in life, or probably in the next life. So that is why we should be very careful with these oxygen targets. So maintain these oxygen targets at all points for any baby who is on any kind of respiratory supports which involve oxygen. The next monitoring, so that concludes the respiratory monitoring. Now, another system which is very vitally connected with the respiratory system is cardiovascular system. So we have to monitor the cardiovascular system clinically. So monitor the CFTs, heart rates, pulse volume. So look at the pulse volume, whether it is high volume, low volume, or it is normal volume. Try to palpate the lower limb pulses also, femorals and dorsalis pedis. That is also very important. Okay, whenever you are examining the baby, always feel the radial pulse, if not at least the brachial pulse and femoral pulse, and always try to palpate even the dorsalis or posterior tibial. Okay, so if they are palpable, means at least the volume is pretty good, maybe on a higher side. Even if dorsal is very well felt, that means the volume is higher. So you have so much of information from palpating the pulse. And the another important thing is to look at the blood pressures. So when you're looking at non-invasively, always have the different cuff sizes. So don't use a bigger cuff for a smaller baby, and use an appropriate size cuff at the appropriate part of the body. That is for a, don't, if you're using for a upper limb or a lower limb, if the baby is too fat, then you may have to change the size of the cuff when you're using for a lower limb when compared to the upper limb. So always please be careful with that thing. And if you have a provision, you can use an invasive blood pressure monitoring using the pressure transducers. So these are also available freely. They are not very costly. And for babies, there is a need for multiple inotropes on the baby, and baby is not improving the single inotrop, then it is always better to go with a invasive blood pressure monitoring, because that will help you in titrating your inotropes more accurately. So once you have done clinically and you are pretty happy, so why do you want to do all these things clinically? Because the shock can ensue, can happen at any point of time for a baby who is on a ventilation. A sepsis can start, or a baby is already in sepsis. PDA can always open in a premature baby, which can create, which can trouble and and shock can happen because of PDA and hypovolemia. Unusual, but it is still possible in a hypovolemic baby if you are not good on fluids, if you are not right on fluids, or the baby is losing fluid somewhere. The other thing is even the ventilation parameters also can make the baby go into shock. It's very unusual if you take care properly, but as sir has already told you, if you follow the appropriate steps, then the baby will not enter shock because of ventilation. But if you use very high pressures, very high mean airway pressure, then it can impede the venous return and the baby can go into shock because of less cardiac output. This is also possible. So be careful with that. And of course, another fancy equipment which has almost become a routine thing to have echocardiogram, and this will definitely help you in monitoring the cardiovascular status. The another thing just below your systems, we have the abdomen. Again, it is very much connected to the respiratory system, because we all know that if there is too much of abdominal distension, it is going to impair the gaseous exchange, it is going to splint the diaphragm, and it is going to create problem to the baby. So that is why we don't want gaseous distension to happen. And if a baby is on an invasive ventilation, if there is significant leak is there, then baby can distend his tummy because of the gaseous, because of aerophagia. Or a baby is on a non-invasive ventilation, there is definitely the baby can have, it's very common to have a distended bowel loops because of the aerophagia which happens in non-invasive ventilation. So it is mandatory that for any baby who is on ventilation to have a nasogastric or a orogastric tube, whichever is possible, has to be put on the baby. This is very important, and we can continue feeds and when a baby is on ventilation, which I will again come on nutrition. And the most important thing is in between feeds, you have to keep the mouth of the NG tube open so that you can vent out the gas, whatever is entering into the baby's stomach. So it's very important that you keep the stomach non-distended when a baby is on ventilation. And it is also important to look at the organomegaly, especially hepatomegaly, because you know the cardiovascular status from the hepatomegaly. Or the significant hyperinflation, the liver can be pushed down, and you can have the liver getting pushed down, and you will be able to palpate the liver. So abdomen status also need to be monitored very meticulously. Another important thing is most of us forget monitoring the CNS system in a baby is on ventilation. We think it is only the respiratory and cardiovascular is involved, but CNS is very much necessary. If everything is normal, if you want to extubate the baby, the lung wise is normal, ventilation settings are normal, cardiovascular, the baby is doing pretty good, but if it doesn't have a good respiratory effort because of CNS problem, then what's the point? You cannot extubate the baby, isn't it? So that is why monitoring the sensorium of the baby is very important. So whether the baby is having a normal sensorium, how is his tone, how is his reflexes, how is the AF. So at least these 4 parameters, you need not do a detailed clinical CNS examination, but at least have a look at these gross things. Whether the baby is having a normal sensorium, whether he is having a normal tone and reflexes, whether he is moving all the limbs normally, and how is the AF. So these things will tell you whether he is having a normal CNS, so that when you plan an extubation, the baby is able to will be able to sustain the extubation successfully. Because for a baby on ventilation, so you may have so many brain problems also creeping in, isn't it? For a preterm baby, an IVH can occur at any point of time in the acute phase, which can depress his sensorium. He may start throwing a seizure, or babies may be on some anti-epileptic drugs which can knock the baby out because of the sedative effects. So that also is very important to keep in mind. Electrolytes can go haywire, so that could be the reason for his altered sensorium. And CO2, which is purely under our control, if not completely, at least mostly we are handling the CO2 when the baby is being ventilated, isn't it? So if there is a washout of CO2, hypocarbia ensues, then the brain blood flow comes down, and that can decrease his baby's sensorium. He may become dull. The respiratory efforts can decrease if the baby is having a significant hypocarbia. Similarly, if we are having a significant hypercarbia, that also can knock out his brain. So that is why monitoring the CNS is very important when a baby is on ventilation. So as I said, and of course, clinically these things, and if you are in doubt clinically, there is something happening in the brain, always you can peep into it, peep inside the skull using the neurosonogram. So ultrasound is very handy. So that can help you looking out. So as you can see, ultrasound is handy at all steps, right from the respiratory system, cardiovascular system, for the neurosonogram, for the abdomen, everywhere ultrasound is very useful. So it's very good idea to have an echo machine or an ultrasound machine in-house to get a better care of the baby. Now putting everything together, so is also important, so that you document all these things. You are doing everything meticulously, but nothing is documented, then that doesn't mean anything at all, isn't it? So your colleague may not know what you have done, and serial monitoring becomes difficult if there is no documentation of all this stuff. So you can have a chart, you can customize the chart as per your requirements, but at least ensure that all these numbers are there. You can add more to it as much as you need, so that you keep monitoring serially over a period of time, so that you will clearly know that the baby is improving or deteriorating. And monitoring also saves you from the medical legal aspects also, isn't it? So that is why monitoring is very important, and documenting in the monitoring chart is very, very important. Now from the clinical examination, now you can move on to the radiological system, that is X-rays. So no routine X-rays. Don't routinely use the X-rays for because just because the baby is on ventilation, don't keep on doing X-rays. There is no need to do X-ray prior to extubation. If babies are doing everything well, you can extubate him, and no need for a routine X-ray post surfactant. The baby is clinically improving, no need for X-ray. So only if there is a clinical deterioration, then only you do a X-ray. Otherwise, there are no routine X-rays for babies on this one. So ultrasound, so instead of X-rays, even when the deterioration, ultrasounds are very handy nowadays, because I said earlier, you can do ultrasound at all the level for all the things, including lung problems like pneumothorax, HMD, effusions, consolidations. All these things can be picked up on ultrasound. And of course, you will know the position of endotracheal tube, the line position. So all these things are clear from the ultrasound, but it needs expertise. So once you have an expertise, build your expertise over a period of time, then it's a very handy tool, and you can do the ventilation properly. Now moving on to the second thing, that is skin care, which is you all know that especially preterm babies or even term babies, they have very fragile skin. This is because the more the lower the gestation, the lesser the gestation, the stratum corneum is going to be very thin, and the moment it comes out, the dermis is exposed. So once dermis is exposed, it becomes a portal of entry for all kinds of nico-organisms. Pathogenic organisms are readily colonized, and they will enter the baby and create late onset sepsis. And the other thing is insensible water loss. The more that damage is done to the skin, more is going to the insensible water loss. So you know that for a baby in an ICU and sick, almost there are so many lines, probes, tubes, so many things are there, and everything is fixed to the skin only. So if you don't take a proper care of the skin, at the end of the day, you may save the baby, but the baby will not have a good skin. So it is the baby may look pretty ugly to look at, and you're not only that, you're also creating a lot of trouble to the baby also. You are exposing him for infection, you are exposing him for significant water loss to occur. There are so many problems which are happening. So that is why you should take a proper skin care. How do we do that? So try to use as less adhesive as possible. Cut down, be very finicky in use of adhesives. Don't be very liberal in the usage of adhesives. And when you are using an adhesive, try to use a skin friendly adhesive. There are a whole lot of skin friendly adhesives that are available in the market. I'm not promoting one or the other. You can have something like a transparent films like Tegaderm, you can have Steri strips, you can have Durapore. There are so many others in the market. So try to use them wherever it is needed. And once you have used them, once the need for a probe or a tube is there and the need to remove comes, when you are removing, try to be very, very gentle. You wet the cloth, take a moist cotton, dip in a warm water, and then try to gently soak the adhesive. And once it is wet, try to remove it layer by layer. Don't just peel off in one thing. Try to remove it parallel to the skin and stretch the skin below the adhesive and gently remove the adhesive. Spend some time when you are removing. So train your nurses as to how to remove these adhesives in a very, very gentle manner. This is very, very important. Not only sticking, but removal is also very important, because this is the time when you can peel off the epidermis and expose the dermis and create all the problems. So train them properly and remove the adhesive very gently. And as you can see, try to use as less adhesive as possible. This is for fixing the temperature probe, which has been done with the Tegaderm. This kind of a strip comes on the Tegaderm itself. So you can use this nice designer things. So when you want to put some non-invasive devices, non-invasive interfaces, you have to protect the skin by putting a base layer with a skin friendly adhesive onto which you can stick your interface. Similarly for fixing your IV cannulas. So when you are using CPAPs, you should protect the nose very well. So you should ensure that you don't damage the nasal structure, the cartilage, the columella, and the nasal ala, ala nasi. Everything has to be protected. So you can use something like this. This is a cannulate which is available in the market. You can just, it is custom made, so it is very easy. You can just apply. The holes are also there so that you don't injure the nose when you apply the CPAP. So by the time when the baby is off CPAP, his nose is also very much intact. The another major fixation which we all do routinely is using the these things, the the what do you call the adhesives for lines, that is UAC and UVC. You can use this bridge model, but when you are using the bridge model, always here it is not done here, but it's always a good idea to have a transparent dressing on the skin onto which you fix these adhesives, so that when you remove it, you don't peel off the skin. So, or you can use simply this one. This is what we use. Just use steri strips. Okay, very simple. No need to have such a elaborate bridge. You can just apply this steri strip. It stays. It does not come out, and we have been using. And there is no accidental removal of the umbilical catheters till now, at least. Similarly, PICC line fixation. Ensure a transparent dressing. Always ensure that the tip is visible. The tip where the device has entered the skin should be visible, because any amount of erythema or induration begins here, and any leak which is happening is visible, so that you can pick it up early before the entire limb gets swollen. Okay, so always, and it has to be fixed in a clean manner. And there is no need for splints. You can see it has been put at the popliteal angle, but we have not put any splint, and we don't put the splints also. It is not necessary to have the joint splinted, even if you put the central lines in the at the level of the joint, because we usually insert the joint, isn't it? The saphenous vein here, or the saphenous vein at the ankle, or cubital fossa. So it is always done at the joints, but still there is no necessity to put any splint. Now I think I'm running out of time, so I'll just rapidly run through. The other thing is prevention bundles. So VAP, how do you prevent? Because baby is already tubed in, and he's at risk of pneumonia because of your intervention, because there is significant colonization which is going to happen in the nasopharynx, around the endotracheal tube, and around the nasogastric as well as orogastric tubes. And if he aspirates this colonized infected material, he will develop pneumonia. So how do we prevent that? The foremost is hand hygiene. We all know the 5 steps of hand hygiene. It has to be meticulously followed in a ventilated baby or even otherwise healthy baby. When you are handling any baby in an ICU, so you have to use a strict hand hygiene. The second thing is, how do you position your endotracheal tube? Don't position the endotracheal vertically on the baby. It should not be like this. This is very not at all correct way of doing it, because the adapter has to lie on a flat surface below the baby's level, because whatever secretion which is coming out through the endotracheal tube gets settled here. And second thing is, if there is any condensate which is coming from the tubes, it should not go into the baby. If you keep it like this, the condensate which is coming from the endotracheal tube, from the ventilator tubings, will drip into the baby. So that should not happen. The endotracheal tube has to be, the adapter and the connector has to lie on a dependent area so that they don't enter the baby, and the tubings have to be like this so that the condensate will not enter into the baby. So this thing is very important. So don't do this kind of a fixation. So always keep it at the side of the baby. And another important step is to ensure a proper humidification, which will again be talked in the next lecture. Again, you will have a detailed lecture on humidification. So ensure a proper temperature, and there should not be any visible condensate in the inspiratory limb. So without proper humidification, you will have dry gases entering, and that will lead to problem, increased infections. Another most important thing to prevent infection is meticulous oral or endotracheal suction, because there is no need for routine suction. Suction is indicated only if there is a problem. If you see the baby is irritable, or there are secretions, or when you auscultate, there is significant conducted sound, then only you have to do a oral or endotracheal suction. There is no need for routine suction for a baby on ventilation. You need 2 persons. You need a good disposable. You will have a brief video of this. You can see. So this is the baby here. If you see, this baby is irritable. is significantly irritated, as you can see, and there are visible secretions in the endotracheal tube. He is having a increased distress. There is significant respiratory distress, and there is tachycardia. You can see there is some fluid in here also. The humidification is appropriate, but he is very much irritated. There is water in the circuit. If you see the graphics, they are very erratic. So that means which tells you that there is significant secretions. So all these parameters are telling you that there are secretions. So for oral suction, use a separate suction catheter. The person who has performed the hand hygiene, and once you're done it, you just throw it in appropriate disposable thing. You need 2 persons for doing endotracheal suction. As you can see, one person is an assistant who is helping her to remove the catheter, and they are measuring the catheter as to how much depth it has to be inserted. Now they are pre-oxygenating it little bit, around 10% above the previous thing. And now the other person removes the endotracheal. The person who is doing suction will do only that, nothing else. The rest of the stuff is done by the assistant. So now they are bagging it using the Neopuff or the TP's device there. Now she is inserting it. And when you are inserting it, you are supposed to close it. Don't apply suction. You should apply suction only when you are withdrawing it. So insert the catheter, close the catheter, insert it, rotate it, and then release the suction, and then remove the catheter. So that has to be done. So once it is done clearly, now the baby is comfortable. He's now started sleeping, and the distress has settled. So this is very important. Meticulous suction has to be done when you are doing endotracheal suction. So this is very, very important when you do it. Now, another most important thing to avoid VAP is to avoid routine use of H2 blockers or PPIs, because that will increase the risk of necrotizing enterocolitis. If you block the acidity, gastric acidity, there is always an increased risk of NEC and sepsis. So avoid using ranitidine. So there is no need for any stress ulcer prophylaxis just because baby is on ventilation. And another important thing is early enteral nutrition. So this will decrease the gastric colonization with the pathogenic organisms. So less incidence of late onset sepsis. So that also helps you in better weight gain. So early enteral nutrition is very, very important in making the baby get out of ventilation very early. And you can use oral care, but there is not much evidence to say or against it or for it. But you may apply. Colostrum can be applied intraorally to improve the colonization, to decrease the, to improve beneficial bacterial colonization, and to decrease the pathogenic organism colonization. Oral care can be tried. Nothing wrong in doing it, but even if you don't do, I mean, we don't know exactly whether it is really improves the this one. And most important thing to decrease the incidence of VAP is early extubation. So as everyone has told you previously, right from the moment you tube the baby, there should be a plan for extubation. So start planning for extubation right in the first hour of intubation. So that's very important. Another common infection is because of central lines. So these are the various ports or portal of entry of central line. We have the skin puncture at the hub site and the infusate which you are using. I'm just running through. Again, you can have a bundle of things, and this bundle helps you in decreasing the risk of infection. So right from the time of insertion to the maintenance. So if you follow a proper bundle care approach, then the incidence of central line associated bloodstream infections are controlled significantly. So you will decrease the incidence of late onset sepsis. The last one, neurodevelopmental supportive care. So whenever a baby is on ventilation, don't just lie them like a frog so that the hands and legs are splayed like a frog. That is not the posture. We want to ensure that they have a flexed posture. So allow them to have a flexed posture. So use this kind of a nesting. A nice nesting can be done. A proper shoulder roll. Ensure the baby has a cap. Okay. If possible, you can have mittens also, but may not be possible if there are devices attached to it. But caps, head support, shoulder roll, and a good nesting is very, very important so that the baby is very comfortable. If you ensure a flex posture, babies will remain calm and comfortable. The need for sedation goes dramatically. The need for sedation completely disappears if you can ensure this kind of a support. Another, the other development supportive care is to ensure minimum light and sound. So avoid bright light, try to cycle the lights in day and night fashion, reduce the noise in the NICU by doing all the appropriate management. And of course, don't disturb the baby every half an hour. Don't touch him every half an hour. ensure you cluster your all the activities in a single time, so that ensure a good sleep time to the baby. A sicker baby needs more sleep time. So don't keep on touching him. At the same time, you cannot compromise on monitoring also. So try to do as far as possible non-invasive monitoring. Don't touch him too much, and do it. If you want to do it in a clustered manner. So all the activities happen at one point of time, and he has a significant sleep time. And pain also is very important. We all know that babies do have pain, but use on, as far as possible, try to use only non-pharmacological methods, that is sucrose, massage, nesting, tucking. So all this is kind of facilitated tucking. So all these things will ensure that babies remain calm and comfortable. So when you do this, the need for sedation, opioids, everything will come down. And absolutely there is no role for muscle relaxants in all 99% of ventilation cases. There is no need for routine sedation or muscle relaxants. Opioid analgesics may be required in a bigger baby like MAS with PPHN, where he's fighting the ventilator and he fails on these non-pharmacological aspects. KMC, may not be possible in a very sick baby on a ventilator, but if it's a non-invasive ventilation, stable baby, you can do KMC, because this is the best developmental supportive care, which has got multimodal in nature, but may not be feasible in a sick baby. Nutrition, the last but not the least, very important. Ventilation is never a contraindication for feeding. You have to ensure, as long as his stomach is normal, his GI system is normal, please ensure the feeds are initiated early, minimal enteral feeds, and then increase the feeds to reach the full feeds as early as possible. Because even if the baby is on ventilation and minimal amount of inotropes, you can definitely give feeds. Babies can be on full feeds and still be on high frequency. That is also possible. So ensure that his tummy is always full with feeds, unless his GI system is abnormal. If he's having necrotizing enterocolitis, definitely cannot feed the baby. But otherwise, ensure feeding as early as possible and try to reach the full feeds. As this will reap you a lot of benefits. It will help you in getting the baby out of ventilation early, out of oxygen early, because better weight gains, he will be able to sustain extubation very nicely. You will be able to get him off the central lines early, so less infection. So there are lots of benefits because of early feeding, especially with mother's own milk. So in conclusion, meticulous monitoring is very essential. So you can do clinically most of the monitoring, and radiological ultrasound is preferred nowadays over routine X-rays. Early nutrition, as I said, is very vital, and try to prevent infections by using a bundle approach, so that you can ensure a proper ventilation. I thank you for giving me this opportunity.